My best friend's husband told me I was holding her back from being a good mother, and she said nothing. So I stayed out of their life for good. My best friend Yara and I have known each other since we were 9 years old. That is 22 years. I was there when her dad left. She was there when my mom got sick. I drove 4 hours each way to visit her every month when she moved for college. She flew back for my graduation when nobody else came. We are the kind of friends who don't need to talk every day because the foundation doesn't crack from silence. When Yara married Dominic 3 years ago, I was her maid of honor. I planned her bridal shower. I hand-addressed 130 invitations because she wanted calligraphy and couldn't afford a professional. I altered her veil myself because the seamstress quoted double her budget. Dominic was fine at first. Quiet. He worked in commercial insurance and had strong opinions about things nobody asked about. He would correct Yara on small things in front of people. The year something happened. The name of a restaurant. The exact date of an event. Always small. Always public. Always with this tone like he was doing her a favor by fixing her. About a year and Dominic started making comments about me. Not to my face at first. Yara would mention them casually. Dominic thinks you call too much. Dominic says it's weird you still come over every weekend. Dominic asked why you don't have a boyfriend yet and said maybe it's because you spend all your time with married women instead of putting yourself out there. I let each one go. I adjusted. Called less. Visited less. Gave them space. It didn't help. 8 months ago, Yara had her baby girl Luz. I flew out the day she went into labor and took 2 weeks off work so I could be there. I brought food every day that first week. I organized a meal train so Yara had dinners covered for the entire first month. I bought the car seat because she mentioned they were short on money after the delivery bills. I was there constantly because Yara asked me to be. She was overwhelmed and exhausted, and Dominic had gone back to work 5 days after the baby was born. 5 days. His wife was recovering from a C-section, and he went back after 5 days because he said they couldn't afford more time, but he bought new golf clubs the same month. They were sitting in the hallway when I came over to help with the baby. 2 months after Luz was born, Yara invited me for dinner. I flew in on a Friday because she said Dominic wanted to cook, and it would be nice to have a normal evening. I brought wine and a small toy for Luz. We were at the table. I was holding the baby because Yara's arms were sore from carrying her alone all day. Dominic was across from me. He had been quiet most of the evening. Then he put his fork down and said, "Can I be honest with you?" I said, "Sure." He said, "I think you're the reason Yara hasn't grown since the wedding." He said she still acts like she's 20 because I enable her. He said every time she starts to focus on her family, I show up and pull her back into old habits. He said I call too much, visit too much, insert myself too much. He said Yara would be a better wife and mother if I gave her room to actually become one. I was holding his daughter while he said this. His newborn was asleep on my chest because his wife's arms were too sore from doing it alone all day. Because he went back to work after 5 days to save money he then spent on golf clubs, and he told me I was the problem. I looked at Yara. She was staring at her plate. She didn't say a word. I waited. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. She picked up her glass and took a drink and said nothing. I stood up carefully so I wouldn't wake Luz, handed the baby to Yara, picked up my jacket, and left. Yara texted the next morning saying Dominic didn't mean it the way it sounded, and that he was stressed about money and the baby. She said I should come back so we could talk it out. I told her I wasn't coming back to that table. No. Her husband looked me in the eye and told me I was holding her back from being a good mother while I was literally holding his child because he wasn't there to do it himself. She said he was just protective of their family. I didn't respond to that. I pulled back completely. Stopped bringing meals. Stopped offering to watch Luz so Yara could rest. Stopped filling every gap Dominic left open. I answered Yara's texts but didn't initiate. I was done extending myself into a home where the man who lived there called me a disease on his wife's growth. 4 months later, Yara called crying. Dominic had a kidney condition that had been progressing quietly for years. He needed a transplant. His family had been tested. None were matches. Yara wasn't either. She asked if I would get tested. She said I was the first person she thought of because I had the same blood type. She said she knew things had been hard between us, but this was life or death. Part of me wanted to hang up, but 22 years doesn't just go quiet, even when it should. So I told her I would get tested. Not for Dominic, for Luz, who deserved a father, even if that father didn't deserve much of anything. I made the appointment, but I promised myself one thing. If Dominic couldn't look me in the eye and say he was wrong, I wouldn't go through with it. The blood draw was quick. They took a few tubes, asked me some questions, told me results would take about a week. I drove home and sat in my car in the parking lot for a while before I went inside. That night, Yara called sounding warmer than she had in months. She told me Luz had learned to clap. She said Luz would sit in her high chair and just smack her little hands together over and laugh every single time like she'd invented something new. I smiled even though my chest still hurt. Then Yara said something that stopped me cold. She said Dominic told his family about me getting tested, and his mom said she was surprised I agreed after everything. I went still. I said after everything what? What did he tell his family about me? Yara went quiet. That same quiet from the dinner table. Then she said we can talk about it later. This is good news. Let's just focus on the good news. I needed to know what he said. I called Clarence, Yara's dad. He and I had stayed in touch over the years even after he left the family. I figured if anyone outside that house would tell me the truth, it was him. Clarence sighed the kind of sigh that means someone has been carrying something heavy. Then he said Dominic told Yara's aunt that I was obsessed with Yara, that he had to set boundaries because I was showing up at all hours, calling non-stop, making Yara feel guilty for prioritizing her baby. He said I was possessive. My chest went tight. Obsessed. Possessive. That was the story he'd been telling. Not that I organized a meal train so his wife could eat while recovering from surgery. Not that I bought the car seat he couldn't afford because he blew money on golf clubs. Not that I held his daughter every time I came over because his wife's body was still healing. In Dominic's version, I was the crazy friend who wouldn't go away. I asked Clarence if Yara corrected any of that. He paused. The kind of pause that tells you the answer before the words come. Then he said, "Sweetheart, that's the part that's going to hurt." No, she didn't. She let it stand. He told me Yara's aunt repeated the whole story to the rest of the family. By the time it made the rounds, I was the unstable friend who couldn't let go, and Yara never once opened her mouth to say that wasn't true. The coordinator from the hospital called on a Tuesday afternoon. She said my results were back and that I was a match. Not just a match, a strong one. The best candidate they'd had for Dominic's case. There was no easy out now. I booked a flight for the weekend. I didn't tell Yara I was coming. I I didn't want her coaching Dominic on what to say. I wanted the raw, unfiltered truth from both of them. I landed on a Saturday morning and took a cab straight to their house. The garden box by the door was dead. Brown stems and dry soil. The welcome mat was crooked. Yara opened the door holding Luz on her hip. The baby had gotten so much bigger. Chubby legs, a little tooth coming in, a pink onesie with dried sweet potato on the collar. Yara's face went through 5 different things in 2 seconds. Surprise, confusion, hope, then fear. The house was a mess. Dishes stacked in the sink and on the counter. Laundry piled on the couch, not folded, just thrown there. Baby toys scattered across the floor. And Yara looked thin. Not healthy thin. The kind of thin that comes from not eating enough and sleeping even less. Dark circles under her eyes. Hair pulled back in a bun that hadn't been redone in days. She looked like she was running on empty. Dominic came out of the bedroom. Thinner. Grayer. His skin had a dull look to it and his eyes were puffy. When he saw me, his whole face tightened. He said, "Yara told me you're a match, thank you." He said it flat, like reading words off a piece of paper. I said, "Before we talk about any of that, I need to ask you something." His arms crossed over his chest. The same position from that dinner table. I looked him in the face and said at that dinner 8 months ago, "You told me I was the reason Yara hasn't grown, that I was holding her back. Do you still believe that?" He didn't flinch. He said, "I believe I was looking out for my family." I said, "That's not what I asked." He said, "Yeah, I still think you were too involved, but that doesn't mean I'm not grateful for what you're doing now." Too involved. Present tense. Still. After I had disappeared from their life completely the way he wanted, he still stood there and said I was too involved, like being the kind of friend who shows up is a character flaw. I turned to Yara. I said, "You heard what he said at that dinner. You heard it again just now. Why didn't you say anything?" Either time. Her eyes filled up. Her chin trembled. She said, "It's complicated. He's my husband. He's sick. I can't fight with him right now." I said, "You couldn't fight with him 8 months ago either. He wasn't sick then." Then Dominic stepped forward. The careful mask was gone. Something raw and ugly had come to the surface. He said, "You want the truth? Fine. I told my family you were too attached because you are. You don't have your own family. You don't have a partner. You don't have kids. So you latched onto mine. And now you're standing in my living room making my wife cry when I'm the one who might die. So yeah, I said what I said. Are you going to help me or not?" He said it to my face while needing me to survive. In his mind, I was a lonely woman with no life of her own who attached herself to his family because she had nothing else. I looked at Yara, tears running down her cheeks, Luz babbling against her shoulder, and she still hadn't said a word. That silence was louder than anything Dominic had ever said to me, because Dominic being cruel was just Dominic. But Yara standing there watching him do it and choosing not to speak was a choice she kept making over and over. I picked up my bag. I looked at Yara and said, "I'll call you tomorrow." Then I walked out. I got a hotel room that night instead of flying home. I sat on the edge of the bed with the notepad from the nightstand and started writing. Every meal I cooked, every drive I made, every dollar I spent on things they needed but couldn't afford. Every time I made myself smaller to make Dominic comfortable. I wasn't writing it to prove anything to him. I was writing it so I could see it clearly myself, because part of me, a part I hated, still wondered if maybe I really was too much. Maybe I was the friend who didn't know when to step back. I sat there and stared at the list and tried to find the moment where I crossed a line. The meals. Were those too much? No. Yara asked for help. She was recovering from surgery and her husband went back to work after 5 days. The car seat. Was that overstepping? No. Their baby didn't have one and they couldn't afford it. The visits. Was I there too often? Yara called me crying at least once a week during those first 2 months asking me to come over. Every single item on that list started with Yara reaching out and me reaching back. I wasn't inserting myself. I was answering. And the more I looked at that list, the more the doubt started to drain out of me, and something steadier took its place. I put the pen down and called my mom. Celine listened to everything. Then she said when I was sick, Yara slept on our couch for 2 weeks. She was 15. She skipped school to help me because your father wasn't around. I never once looked at that girl and thought she was too involved. I thought my daughter has a friend who loves her family. That's what love looks like, baby. Don't let that man make you ashamed of it. She was right. This was never one-sided. Yara showed up for me too. She slept on our couch and missed school and held my hand in hospital waiting rooms when she was barely old enough to drive. That was the friendship Dominic called obsession. And then the doubt came back. Not about whether I was too much. A different kind of doubt. I thought about Luz, 8 months old. Chubby legs and a new tooth and hands that clapped together like she just discovered the best trick in the world. If I walked away from this, Dominic might not find another match. The coordinator said I was the best candidate they'd had. If I said no and something happened to him, Luz would grow up without a father. I would be choosing my dignity over a baby's chance to know her dad. And yeah, Dominic was a bad husband and a worse friend, and the kind of man who buys golf clubs while his newborn doesn't have a car seat. But he was still Luz's dad. He was still the person she would look for when she got scared. The person she would reach for in the middle of the night. And if he was gone, she'd carry that hole inside her for the rest of her life the same way Yara carried the hole Clarence left when he walked out. I knew what it looked like when a girl grew up without her father because I watched Yara live it. I watched it make her into someone who clung to any man who stayed, even if staying came with conditions and cruelty and silence at dinner tables. I imagined going through with it, lying on an operating table, a surgeon cutting into me, giving a piece of my body to a man who told me I had no family, no partner, no life. I imagined waking up from surgery 1 kidney lighter and getting a text from Yara that said thanks and then nothing. I imagined Dominic recovering and going right back to being the same person, still telling people I was obsessive, still believing he was right. And I imagined myself healing alone with a scar on my body and a hole where my best friend used to be. Both options made me want to scream. I grabbed my phone and called Wu. He listened to everything without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "You are not responsible for keeping someone alive who made it his mission to push you out of his wife's life. You can walk away, and it's still his illness that's the problem, not your decision." I said, "But what if nobody else matches?" He said, "Then that's still not your fault." He was right. I knew he was right. But knowing something is true and feeling it are two completely different things. He said, "Whatever you decide, make sure it's for you. Not for her, not for him, not for guilt." I didn't sleep, not even a little. I lay in that hotel bed with the lights off and watched the ceiling change color as car headlights passed outside. Every time I closed my eyes, eyes, I saw Luce reaching for me at the door. Every time I opened them, I saw Dominic crossing his arms and telling me I had nothing. Round and round all night until the sky started turning gray and I realized I had been awake for the entire night. I called Yara the next morning and told her to come meet me at the hotel alone. No Dominic, just us. If you can't give me that, I have my answer. There was a pause. I could hear Luce making little sounds in the background, babbling, happy, unaware. Then Yara said, I'll be there in an hour. I ordered coffee I didn't want just to have something in front of me. The lobby was mostly empty. I watched the front door and every time it opened, my stomach tightened. Then it opened again, and it was Yara. She sat down across from me with red eyes and swollen lids and shaking hands, and the first words out of her mouth were, please don't punish Dominic for being bad with words. He needs this transplant. Luce needs her father. Before I could even open my mouth, she went straight to him. Not to us. Not to the friendship. Not to the 22 years. She opened with Dominic, like he was the only thing in the room that mattered. Like I was just a door she needed to walk through to get to what she actually came for. I said, I'm not here to talk about the transplant. I'm here to talk about the fact that your husband has been telling your entire family that I'm obsessed with you and unstable, and you let him. She said he was just venting. He didn't mean for it to spread. I said, but it did. And when it did, you didn't correct it. Clarence told me. Your aunt knows. Your cousins know. Everyone in Dominic's family thinks I'm unhinged. Is that what you think too? She whispered, no. Of course not. You're my best friend. I said then, why didn't you say that? At the dinner. After the dinner. When he told his family. When his own mother was surprised I agreed to get tested. At any point in the last 8 months, why didn't you open your mouth and tell him he was wrong? She was crying hard now. Then she looked at me with the most honest expression I had seen from her in a very long time, and she said, because he's my husband. Because I was alone with a newborn, and he was the only one there every night, and I couldn't afford to fight with him. I couldn't risk him pulling away too. I understood it. That was the part that hurt the most. She was alone and tired and healing from surgery, and her husband was the one person who came home every night, even if he was also the man who went back to work after 5 days and bought golf clubs instead of a car seat. In Yara's mind, keeping him was more important than keeping me. I said, so you sacrificed me to keep him. You let him turn me into the villain so your marriage could feel stable. She looked down at her hands and said I didn't think of it that way. But yeah, I guess I did. For the first time in 8 months, Yara told me the truth. She traded me for peace in her house. And she let Dominic say whatever he wanted about me because fighting him would cost her more than losing me did. I said what I had been up all night figuring out how to say. I'm going to go through with the testing process. I'm going to stay on the donor list. Not because Dominic deserves it. Not because you asked. Because Luce is 8 months old and she didn't do anything wrong. But I am done, Yara. After this, I'm done. I will not come to your house. I will not call. I will not be the person you reach for when things fall apart because you showed me exactly where I stand. I stand behind your husband, behind your fear, behind your silence, and I deserve better than that. Every word came out steady. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. Yara reached across the table and grabbed both of my hands. Her fingers were cold and her grip was tight, and she said, please don't do this. I can't lose you. You're my family. I pulled my hands back, gently. The way you set something down that you've been carrying for a long time, and your arms are finally too tired to hold it anymore. I said I was your family, and you let him convince you I was a problem. The hardest part isn't that Dominic said what he said. It's that you agreed with him by saying nothing. She whispered, what if I talk to him? What if I tell him? And it was so perfectly painfully Yara. Always offering to do the right thing tomorrow. Always promising change in the future tense. As if saying it now after I had already been tested and flown out and stood in her living room taking another round of hits from her husband while she watched would somehow undo all of it. I stood up. I picked up my bag and looked at her one more time and said, you've had 8 months, Yara. I'm not going to wait for you to be brave. I already was. Every single time. For both of us. She didn't say anything. She just sat there with tears falling and hands empty on the table where mine used to be looking at me with an expression that wasn't shock or anger. It was recognition. Like she was seeing clearly, maybe for the first time, exactly what she had let happen. I walked toward the elevator. I could feel her eyes on my back, but I didn't turn around. I waited for the sound of a chair pushing back. Footsteps. My name. But there was nothing. Yara didn't follow me. She stayed at that table the same way she stayed at the dinner table 8 months ago. Sitting. Silent. Letting me walk away because stopping me would mean doing something hard. The elevator doors closed. I stood in the silence and it felt full. Heavy. Like the air after a storm when everything is still and you can finally hear yourself think. I was going to go through with the process. Stay on the donor list. Show up for every appointment. For Luce. Because she was a baby who deserved every chance in the world, including the chance to grow up with her father in the room, even if her father was the kind of man who would never understand what it cost the woman who made that possible. But Yara's number was going to be quiet from now on. Not blocked, not deleted, just quiet. Sitting in my phone next to 22 years of messages and photos and 1,000 tiny pieces of a friendship that used to be the most important thing in my life. I wouldn't erase it, but I wouldn't reach for it either. Yara chose silence. So silence is what she would get. I learned it from her.